Your brain thinking about food, that's not a virus. That's not a bug in the operating system. That is a feature. That is normal. So the problem isn't that you're thinking about food. The problem is what you've been taught to believe that means about you. Hello and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today I want to talk about a question that haunts a lot of people, that a lot of people ask themselves when they're alone with food. And the question is it normal to always want food? And this question is really layered because so much of the promise of healing that I see a lot lately is that when people heal their relationship with emotional eating, people say that you're just not going to be thinking about food. And I just don't think that is really what the end game is, like what the end goal is. Because when people ask me that question, like, is it normal for me to always want food? What they're really asking is, am I normal? Am I normal for thinking about what I'm going to eat? Am I normal for planning my next meal? Am I normal for fantasizing about foods that I'm trying not to eat, right? Wondering what's in the kitchen, even though you just looked, right? Like opening up the cabinet and then going to open up the cabinet again, even though you just closed the cabinet 5 minutes ago. And so I think people really just want to know, like, is it normal for me to have so many thoughts about food all the time or a lot of the time? You know, I think that it comes from this idea, like I said, that the promise of just, you're not going to have these food thoughts, and normal people, they don't think about food. They just eat when they're hungry and they go about their day. They're just not thinking about it. But the thing is that there's a difference between thinking about food and there's a difference between obsessing about food. And so when I reflected back to this question, and when I really was coaching myself in my own healing journey, and I asked myself, you know, is it normal to think about food, like actually normal? I found that the answer was yes, right? It is normal. Humans are supposed to think about food. It's totally fine to think about food. We're wired to think about food because for most of human history, we are animals, right? We are animals with brains and with very complex neurobiology that makes us obviously smarter than animals and able to do a lot more. But ultimately, right, for most of human history, we were more reptilian. Knowing where our next meal was coming from was the most important thing. Surviving was the most important thing. So your brain thinking about food, that's not a virus. That's not a bug in the operating system. That is a feature. That is normal. So the problem isn't that you're thinking about food. The problem is what you've been taught to believe that means about you. And also, like I said in the beginning, the promises of healing that you're just never going to think about food, like that's something that you should strive for, which I disagree, right? I think you should reframe. I think you should have a new relationship with your thoughts about food. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But never thinking about food, not something that, I don't know, I don't want to do that. I do think about food, and you just want to make it not a problem. Because the problem is that the way you've been thinking about food has become distorted by your dynamics with food, whether that's restriction, diet culture, using food for things it was never meant to do, like, you know, emotional heavy lifting. So today I'm going to share 3 specific things that I learned about this when I sat with this question. 3 things that completely shifted how I understood what was happening. And because once I understood this, I stopped thinking something was wrong with me, and I stopped making never thinking about food ever again the solution that I was looking for. And what happened was that I started seeing the pattern for what it actually was and was able to really heal the problem and get the solution that I really wanted, which I believe everyone who's listening to this wants, which is to be able to think about food, be able to look forward to food, be able to enjoy food, be able to make food a part of our, our human experience without it leading somewhere negative. Okay. So that is what we're going to talk about today. But before we dive in, if you are new to me, I want to introduce myself to you. My name is Alana Kessler. I am a registered functional dietitian. I have been living in the health and wellness space as an expert, as someone who needed guidance myself and who coached myself for the past 20 plus years, almost 30 years at this point. I've worked clinically. I worked in hospitals. I own my own private practice. I owned a yoga studio for almost 10 years where I taught yoga and meditation and mindfulness and somatic healing. But over the last 10 years, 10 plus, my focus has really been supporting men and women. And I know this is mostly women listening to this, but men too struggle with this, to help you really find love with your body, lose weight if that is one of your goals, reconnect with yourself, and overcome any kind of addictive, compulsive, emotional issues and behaviors that you might have with food, so you can strip away all the noise and live your best life, because that is what we're here on this earth to do. So if you are new to me, welcome. If you are a longtime listener, welcome back. And let us dive in. Okay, so the first thing I learned is this: thinking about food is normal. Obsessing about food is the less normal thing. It's usually a response to restriction or control. And there's a huge difference between the two. All right, so thinking about food, it looks like, I wonder what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. Maybe pasta, maybe the chicken I have in the fridge. Maybe I'm going to try this restaurant that my husband and I wanted to go to. What am I in the mood for later? I'm looking forward to eating this later. That's normal. That's normal food planning. That's your brain doing its job. Okay. Obsessing about food looks more like this. Like, oh my God, I can't stop thinking about the chips and the cookies that are in the cabinet over there. Like I feel this energy, like I need to get up and go there, but I told myself I wouldn't eat them, but I can't stop thinking about them, and now I'm trying to distract myself. I have work to do, but I'm still thinking about them. And now I'm planning when I can eat them. But when I do that, I might as well just eat them all, because I shouldn't be eating them. And then I'm just continuing to think about it even more, because there's all of this, there's all of this stuff that's surrounding it, right? There's all of this morality that's surrounding it. So that's not normal food planning. When we talk about normal, that's not normal food planning. That's your brain in scarcity mode, right? Your brain is in scarcity mode. And so here's what I realized, that every single time that I was obsessing about food, it was because I was either restricting it in some way, or I had told myself a story that this food was going to do something bad to me if I ate it. Something bad was going to happen if I ate it. If I had mentally restricted it, if I had labeled it as bad, or unhealthy, it's something that I shouldn't want. And this mindset, this attitude created the obsession. It's not because there was something wrong with me per se, but because this restriction and this morality around the food, this whole big narrative, this story, this consequence, right? I put all this consequence around the food. This is what this does to the human brain. And there's actually research on this. The Minnesota starvation experiment in 1944, they took healthy men with no history of disordered eating and put them on a calorie-restricted diet for 6 months. They became obsessed with food. Okay, they thought about it constantly. They dreamed about it. They collected recipes. They talked about it endlessly. Some of them even changed their careers to go into fields related to food. And these were normal men with normal relationships with food. But restriction turned them into people that just could not stop thinking about it. Okay, and when the experiment ended, they were finally allowed to eat freely again. The obsession gradually faded. Their brains went back to normal, because at the end of the day, their obsession wasn't about them. It was this external application that came in, this restriction, this calorie restriction. And, what we hear a lot is that if you think about food all the time, you need to not do that, right? Like if you're thinking about food all the time, you need to control yourself better. You need to figure out a way to stop being so obsessed. But the obsession is continuing to make the thinking about the food a problem. The obsession happens when we take action to, when we make the thinking about it an issue and we try to control the thinking. That's what's happening. And once you understand that that's what's happening, it makes everything a lot easier, and you can start addressing the issue, which is the behaviors that you're taking to the thinking about the food, which is usually controlling and restricting. So if you stop doing that and you can allow yourself to make thinking about food an okay thing, just a regular, normal thing, and reframe and rewire your relationship to thinking about food, which is something that I teach everyone to do in my programs, you will be able to think about food and it's totally fine. It's not going to lead to any kind of behaviors that lead to obsession. The second thing is the wanting food all the time isn't always about hunger, and that's okay. Because there's this idea also when we're learning to heal from emotional overeating, or we're looking to lose weight, or whenever we're trying to adjust or adapt our relationship with food, one of the tools and the skills that you have to learn is eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full. Now, that's important to connect with these hunger cues, but there's this idea that you should only want food when you're physically hungry. And if you want food at any other time, that's wrong. That's emotional overeating. That's emotional eating narrative or emotional eating, stuff going on, and that's a problem. But the thing is that humans have always wanted food for more than just fuel for being hungry. Food is social. Food is celebratory. Food is comforting and can be comforting. I don't think it's a problem to sometimes have food as comfort. It's a problem when it's wrapped up in other things that we've talked about before, and if it's your only comfort and coping mechanism. But the truth is, food is comforting. Food is cultural. We eat birthday cake not because we're hungry, right? Cake is usually after a meal, so you're definitely not hungry. But we eat birthday cake not because we're hungry, but because it's someone's birthday and we're celebrating them, right? We eat popcorn at the movies not because we go to the movies hungry and that's our meal, and that's, but because, it's part of the experience of going to the movies. We eat a recipe from, a cookbook back in the 1920s from our grandma, not because it's the most delicious option, but because it connects us to the memory of family, of love. And none of that is wrong at all. It's part of being human. The problem isn't that we use food or want food for things beyond hunger. The problem is when food becomes the only tool that we have for managing our inner world, our internal emotional experience, right? It's if we only use food, right? When we're sad, we eat. When we're anxious, we eat. When we're bored, we eat. When we're celebrating and something fun happens, we eat, right? When we're lonely, we eat. And not in a conscious, intentional way. Part of the nuance here is like choice, right? And again, like that's something that is the skill we want to learn, is choice, is how to make choices that we feel good about, right? So we're not saying we're doing this in a conscious, intentional way. We're doing this in an automatic, compulsive way, okay, where food is the default response for any uncomfortable or stimulating feeling. And the reason this happens is because many of us have not been taught how to be with our feelings, how to process our feelings, right? How to integrate our feelings, right? We're taught to fix them, to avoid them, to make them go away. And food is really good at making things go away, right? Temporarily, not long term, but temporarily, it is really good. It's sensational. It tickles all of our senses. It creates distraction. It creates immersiveness. Right? So our brains learn that if you're feeling something uncomfortable, you should eat. And that becomes the pattern. And then we want food all the time. It has nothing to do with hunger, but it's because as a human, we're pretty much always feeling something. And our brain has learned that food is a solution. Okay, but here's the thing is that the wanting isn't the problem. The wanting is just information. It's your brain saying, I need something right now. When you want food, and it's in this kind of urgent way, it's your brain saying, I need something right now. And usually it's not food, it's something else. It's something else. It's rest, it's connection, it's something, right? It's more excitement. And so when you can start to distinguish between I'm wanting food because I'm hungry, or I'm wanting food because it's part of this human experience that I'm intentionally choosing. And you can distinguish between that and I'm wanting food because I'm feeling something and I don't know how to be with this. Everything really does start to change and you could start rewiring. And like I said, sometimes the answer is still food, and that's really okay. Sometimes the answer is something else. And we got to learn that discernment. We have to be able to discern. And when you can give yourself that something else, the wanting for food wanes. It doesn't become this thing that feels like it has power over you, that's so huge and so big in your body. You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone. But there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this. The problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today. So before I move on to the third thing, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to us on all the platforms, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. You know, when you subscribe there, when you give us a rating, 5 stars, and a review, it helps the algorithm really push out our conversations to people that really need to hear it the most. And, you know, it's really helpful. And so if you've been listening to us for a while, or if you're new, please give us that 5-star rating, a written review if you feel so inclined. Those definitely help people feel like listening to this is worth their time. And we all know that time is such a valuable commodity. And I don't take it lightly that you are taking precious time out of your day to not only listen to this podcast, but to give us even more energy and to share it with other people or give us this 5-star review and rating. So thank you so much in advance. Okay, so the third thing that I learned is this. If you are constantly wanting food, it oftentimes means that your brain doesn't feel safe. And this was such a big realization for me because I kept thinking to myself, why do I always want food? What is wrong with me? And what I finally understood was that the constant wanting, that energy of wanting, was actually just a safety signal. My brain was in a constant state of perceived threat. And I don't mean physical threat, although for some that might be the case. What I mean is more of a psychological threat. Threat from restriction, threat from feeling deprived, threat from the belief that I couldn't make decisions around food that weren't going to lead to somewhere negative, somewhere bad. I also felt like psychological threats from hypervigilance and anxiety and chronic stress, right? Never feeling like I was enough or doing enough. Threat from FOMO, threat from feeling like my life wasn't where it was supposed to be. And when your brain is constantly like scanning for threat, right? When it's constantly just absorbing these different stressors and tension psychologically, we get exhausted, psychologically exhausted. And I know for myself, you can physically get exhausted from it, right? If you're just sitting down doing nothing, or not doing nothing, but if you're just sitting there in one spot and you're not physically exerting, right? If you're not physically exerting, but you're emotionally and mentally and psychologically exerting, you can get exhausted, and your brain will do two things, right? It will seek comfort, which is food, right? Food can provide comfort. And because it perceives that you're in a threat, it will hoard resources. And food is a resource. So my brain was constantly seeking food. It was doing the first step of hoarding, which is like seeking food, because it didn't feel safe. It didn't feel safe. It thought we might not have enough. We might end up in a place where we're restricting again because I don't feel good in my body, and I'm going to have to restrict soon, and I'm going to have to go on a diet soon, right? I need to think about food a lot because I don't want to miss an opportunity to eat. That's why the wanting was always there, because my brain was trying to protect me. It was trying to protect me from the threat that my psychology was inputting into it. That my psychology and my nervous system, the way that my nervous system was interpreting my environment, my experiences, as a threat. The wanting food doesn't go away, and it shouldn't go away. It just, like I said in the beginning, it should just be reimagined, how we think about wanting food. Because if our brain feels safe, wanting food doesn't feel threatening, right? If we're feeling safe in our body, if we're feeling safe in our experience, in our environment, and we learn how to reimagine what it means to want food, right? And that takes a bunch of steps of rewiring your brain, then, it's fine. Wanting food is not a negative or threatening experience, right? You know that food is always available, and you could say no to yourself now because you can get it later. It knows that you don't need to restrict. There's not going to be any kind of judgment for eating, right? It knows that your eating is not a moral issue. When your brain trusts that you're going to be engaging with food consistently and adequately, and there's no problem to derive pleasure from it responsibly, thinking about food and wanting food doesn't become a problem. But building this trust, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't just tell your brain, hey, it's fine now, all is good. Your brain is going to need proof, and it needs repeated experiences of, we wanted food, we ate the food, we didn't spiral, we didn't gain 100 pounds, and, we're still okay. It needs repeated experiences of food is available and we're not in danger, right? Like, we don't need to hoard food. We don't need to worry that food isn't ever going to be here again. And over time, with enough of these experiences, which is why this is about putting yourself in situations with support and with tools to support you. so that you can put yourself in these situations, and with enough of them and applying different tools in them, your brain starts to relax, starts to feel safe. And when it feels safe, the constant stress about the thinking about food wanes, it fades, it goes away. And not because of some like magic thing. And again, we don't want to not think about food. We want to not make thinking about food feel like a problem. I think the real question before we end is not, is it normal to always want food, but what would it feel like to not be consumed by thoughts of food? Because I think that's what people really want. They don't want to never think about food, like I said. They want to think about food in a regulated, normal way. The way someone thinks about what they're going to have for dinner without turning it into a whole internal drama about whether they should have it or if they've already eaten too much or if they're going to regret it later. Right? They want to be able to see food and not immediately start calculating or negotiating or restricting, right? Or throwing food in the garbage and throwing water on it so you don't have it later, right? They want food to be just food, right? Not emotional, not an emotional crutch, not a moral issue, not something that you have to constantly manage, just food. And I want you to know that is so possible. It really is. But it requires understanding what's creating the constant urgency, that constant feeling of fear around thinking about food. And then doing the work to address it, right? Not surface level, deep work that goes into a lot of things that basic, superficial food-based diet programs just don't go into. You have to look at these restriction patterns that you might not even realize that you have. Right? And these go beyond being a perfectionist or a people pleaser. You need to do work that builds tools for managing your emotions and your internal experiences and stimulating experiences without food. Or not without food, but not having food be the only thing, right? There have to be other things besides food. Right? You need to do work that helps your brain feel safe again. That's not just about you. That's about you and the entanglements and relationships that you have in your life. And this work often requires structure, support, right? It requires having a framework or someone who understands the psychology of all of this and can help you really navigate it. Because here's the thing, you can have all the insight in the world. You can understand exactly why you are always wanting food. But if you don't know how to actually change the patterns in your specific life that are creating it in these ways that you might not even see in the moment, you stay stuck for sure. You stay in the cycle of thinking about food and thinking it's a problem and thinking that the solution is just never thinking about food. But that's not true, because then you're just like missing so much of life. And I don't want that for you. Right? I want you to be able to think about food and it to be something that's nourishing and exciting and brings joy to your life. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Just a reminder, if you want to hear more from me, I have a weekly newsletter called the Sunday Newsletter that I send out, you guessed it, every Sunday morning, usually around 8 a.m. Eastern, 5 a.m. Pacific. So you can go ahead to the website, www.bewellbyak.com, and sign up there. Until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.